Welcome to Lawyer Business Advantage. This podcast is dedicated to helping attorneys earn more money, get better clients, and spend more time with family. I'm your host, Alay and founder of Law Firm Success Group. Smart business guidance for small law firms begins in 3, 2, 1. And it's my pleasure to welcome to Lawyer Business Advantage, Matthew Kaing with ePseudo Technologies. Matthew, how are you?
Hey, Alay, it's good to see you here. I'm happy to have this conversation with you, and can't wait to get into learning more about what you do and then what we do as well. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on the show because I know whenever you and I talk, you have the unique gift of making IT not boring. So I'm looking forward to a really good chat today. And one of the first questions I have for you is, and this is really focused on our small law firm owners.
Mhm.
When should a law firm invest in IT support? What do you think?
Yeah, so when I think of small law firms, usually just to be clear, it's either we're talking about law firms that are solo entrepreneur to maybe under 20 or 30 people. Is
Yeah,
that okay?
it sounds.
So I think a lot of small law firms that we talk to, in general, everybody uses technology on a daily basis. The question is, when do they need help from somebody like us or maybe some other third party? And that's a really good question. I often ask that, hey, most of them have to deal with client information, and those client information have sensitive data. So if they are trying to protect those client sensitive information, who's responsible for that? If they don't hire somebody, they have to manage it themselves. Then the second question is employees. Do they have employees? When they start having employees, they need to have some structure around how the technology is being used, how to share that information, who's going to make the technology work. Because to me, it's that, and when employees can't do their work, it's because of their technology, they get frustrated.
Sure. Yeah.
And they feel like, hey, if I can't do my work, I can't serve you, and the frustration, it's hard enough to already try to please your client. Now you have to deal with your own technology problem.
It's really interesting because the IT services landscape has changed so much since, when you and I were just getting into business. I mean, it used to be IT was, located in your office and they would,
Yep,
help. And most of it was, on-site, hands-on.
that's
But a
correct.
lot of it now these days, it's weird. The stuff's pretty reliable. So once you set it up and get it working and then install, regular maintenance to keep
Mhm.
security up and all of that, it generally moves forward. What's been your experience?
Yeah, so I agree. Technology has evolved. We're moving towards cloud-based software, but it's an ongoing software as a service technology versus, I don't know, let's talk about traditional WordPerfect, for example, which a lot of law firm uses.
I remember WordPerfect.
Okay. But those were like you install once and it doesn't change, it runs on your local computer. But now things are cloud-based, and the challenge with that is once you use the software, where do you store that information? You're not storing it on your local PC anymore. It's like it's either it sits on your local PC, it goes to the cloud. How are you protecting that information? And that's the risk that most business have to understand is it's constantly being under attack. Somebody's trying to get access to your data because that information is what they want to hold you ransom for.
Oh my gosh, we're gonna totally go down that rabbit hole. But before we do, um, at some point, I've talked to attorneys who, and these are oftentimes solo attorneys, and they just want their computer to work. They're
Mhm.
sitting there in their office, and it's like they cannot get anyone to come on site anymore to help them with their computer.
Okay.
In those cases, what do you suggest they do about that?
I think technology right now is there are issues related to hardware, there are issues related to the internet, and there are issues related to the applications. Understanding what that issue is, sometimes it's not clear.
Yeah.
to the end user. And that's what when we work with law firms and small business owner, we're very clear trying to understand, is the issue related to your laptop? Is it a hardware issue? Or is it an internet issue? Or maybe it's your provider, like, I don't know, you can't get your QuickBooks online to work because you can't invoice them. Right? And so these are the things that has to be clear. Now, coming on whether you're asking, I don't know if this is related to whether it makes sense to get on-site support versus remote support. Is that where you're coming from, or just any
Well,
type of
it's
support?
just a problem a lot of my clients have. If they talk to IT firms, oftentimes those firms will provide remote support, which is great.
Mhm.
But oftentimes when they're just getting engaged, they need someone on site to help
Right.
them through, and they don't know if it's a hardware problem or an internet problem or
Mhm.
something. They just need someone to get their system up and running, to be there in front of them working on site. And that seems to be a real frustration these days with IT providers. So I just wanted to get your perspective.
Yeah. So the ideal situation is that when you're starting the first time, things has to be set up. And when you're setting it up, whether people are working from the home office or in an actual office location, there has to be some initial implementation that includes whether setting up your Wi-Fi correctly, whether running the phone system, and those require a lot of on-site initially. But once you get that set up and running, I often tell people that 80 to 90% of the time now, things can be supported remotely. The problem is when you have a hardware issue. Like, let's say you turn on your computer, it just can't log in or it won't even
Right.
start up. That's when we have a problem. And for businesses like that, we often tell them, hey, I always say, get a spare computer. It'll probably just keep that handy just in case if this is something that you need. Just keeping an extra spare computer, you know, you never know when you're gonna drop that computer or you lose it at an airport. So
Right.
having a spare computer to me is the way to get around that. Make sure that computer is set up as your backup in case that this doesn't work. You can just turn on a second one, get it running, and come back to fix the other problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've been through that experience not just once, but twice, where my primary computer went out and I had to use my backup. And fortunately, to your point, everything that I run is in the cloud. And I was back up and running in, I think the first time it was less than 3 hours. The second time it was less than two, like in 90 minutes I was up and running. And I was at 95% of capability, I was pretty much fully there. So that
Mhm.
makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Um, how do you handle getting people on site? Is that something you do through your firm or do you use contractors? How does that work these days?
Most of the clients that we support, we do send a technician on site, and depending on where they are. Now, most people don't want us to come to their home. If they have a home office, we don't usually go to their house. So we ask them to bring it into our office if that's the case. But most of the time, if it's an actual office, our team will go on site. Like if you're setting up a new office, we said, hey, we need to do an assessment to make sure that the internet is set up, the cabling in the office is set up. You you know, you rely so much on cloud application. Without proper internet, without proper wireless, without proper cabling, those things will hinder your performance. And so we have to do that assessment. And on top of that, now if you happen, like a lot of people, I don't know, like a lot of law firms that I would say maybe between 5 to 10 people, they usually have somewhat of a hybrid in model where some come in the office and some work from home. We will do the best we can to support the people working from home, but we often say make sure that if you can, use cable plug in instead of wireless.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Because it's always a challenge. We can't control what you plug what the wireless network that your Comcast or AT&T set up. But if you have a cable plugged in, we know that if you're physically plugged in, have a much better experience.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. This takes me back to my son was having a problem with his PlayStation 5 or something, his new thing. and we were trying to troubleshoot it. And that was one of the questions I asked him. I said, "So, is this actually plugged in?" And he said, "Yeah, it's plugged in through an Ethernet cable." And so I went over and checked it out. The Ethernet cable went to the wireless went to the wireless router. So it wasn't really plugged in. It's funny. Um, but going back to our core point, which is talking
Mhm,
about how we should support and on-site support, I think a lot of this gets back to expectations. What should they expect from their IT company? And having the right expectations means so much. If you
mhm.
were talking to a new client, what would you tell them? What should they expect?
That's a great question because what they think we do and what they think that we and what we actually do are usually not in line. Um, and the onboarding process is often we have a whole team making sure that we set clear expectation, and oftentimes um, we said, okay, here's what we're able to provide. Here's where you have to escalate that, especially things that I would say not under our management. And an example going back to the internet. If you're getting internet at home, there's a probability that internet is not under our support plan or anything. We only support maybe the laptop that you bring home. But if you have a problem getting the internet, oftentimes people will say, why is my computer so slow? And the question I often, our team asks is, okay, can you share, what are you trying to do? Is it the computer that's slow or is it your internet that's slow? And if
Right.
we're clear on that, people are like, oh, yeah, it's my internet. It's not the computer. But it's very fuzzy because you're just trying to get your email out, but you don't know if it's the internet or the computer.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know what it is. All I know is it's not working. Can you
Yeah,
figure
and
it
and
out?
we try our best to help, even though maybe it's not our problem. We would say, hey, contact your ISP or something. Here's what we do. Come back to us. One of the biggest challenge we find is we know attorneys are busy. When we ask something, they often will just say, fix it. And we go, we need a bit more information to fix it. And that's where the discrepancy comes in. It's like, I can't fix it unless you tell me more of what the problem
Sure.
is.
Sure. Yeah, and I know that can be challenging, especially if the attorney's under a deadline. Like they don't have time to waste and they just
Mhm.
get the problem solved. And that stress is real
Yes.
and it can come out, in interactions with pretty much everybody. But in terms of things like response time,
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, how far you would take a situation before you would hand it off back to the client or hand it off to somebody else. You mentioned, internet issues are not, part of it,
Mhm.
but what kind of response time and follow-up should they expect? And
Okay.
yeah, let's start with that.
Sure. So one of the best things that we try to do is if a customer needs help, when they pick up the phone, we answer. We have a live support team all the time to answer. And part of the reason why is they're already upset or they're frustrated and they need somebody who can try to at least not create more problems for them. And that's how we log and respond within 15 minutes or less, unless it's something that they feel like, hey, it's not, whenever somebody calls us, we have a team who's dedicated to at least understand the situation. And we have a support engineer who will work with them to, the key thing is setting the expectation like correctly. And a lot of it is knowing what the actual problem is. Now, when somebody has a internet issue, we'll work with them to the point that after even they restart the equipment and it's still not a problem, it's still not working, then we say, maybe it's an outage in your area.
Right.
like like rain right now, we have rain.
Yeah,
What's the when there's rain, there's always impacting internet because who knows, a flood or whatever, it causes a problem.
sure.
And we'll work with them until we even go to the point where looking at the Comcast or AT&T's website and says, hey, there's outages in this area. I'm sorry, but there's not much even you call them or we call them, there's nothing we can do.
Totally get it. Yeah. What about something like if they're in their practice management system? Let's say it's something like Clio, which is really well known,
Okay. Yeah.
and they're new to the firm and they're having problems doing something in Clio.
Okay.
What should they expect their IT provider to do before they're being told, hey, look, you need to talk to Clio about this.
Okay. For us, when somebody needs help with a practice management like Clio, the first thing we need to know is, um, can they, I mean, what are they trying to do? Like login issue, or maybe the fact that there's functional issue that they're trying to do for Clio. An example is somebody says, hey, look, when I send an email, I want it to be able to go through my Outlook, right? So that is something that if you we will make sure that that functionality integrates within Outlook and Clio. But if you can't log into Clio, we may not have the ability to reset your password. That's where you may have to contact Clio, because unless we're given approval as an admin to that client's account. We do that for other applications such as their Microsoft 365 or Google. We will manage that. Say, oh, you can't log in. If we can confirm who you say you are, we'll help you log in. Here's a real live example. I think a day or two ago, one of a client who was using Clio, she got an email saying, "Hey, I need to reset the password." And then the email says that she's trying to log in from an Apple computer, and then she emails us says, "I don't have an Apple computer, so why is it prompting me to reset my password?"
Yeah, that's a little creepy.
That's the first thing we like. Well, if this is not you, we need to make sure you go in and change your password and make sure you have multi-factor authentication enabled so that somebody's try to access your account.
Yeah. Yeah, that's scary stuff. And I
Yeah.
mentioned we get back to that, and we are now. So I know one of the common responses I hear from law firms when we talk about um, cybersecurity or whatever you want to call it, but really protecting your data at the end of the day
Mhm.
is, my firm is so small. It's just not going to be a target.
Okay.
Um, how would you respond to that?
So I think that's a really good question. And most people always believe that because they're small, they're not a target, or they're not as, I would say, valuable in terms of if somebody try to go after them. And I think the opposite is maybe true. Because they're small, there could be an easier target to go after because they're not investing in the putting in proper security measures. And so they often think that, okay, if you're small, my question is, do you have clients? Are you making money? Or are you collecting money? So if you are, how much is that money worth to you? And oftentimes, when a hacker try to log in, or like an example, like I mentioned, Clio, they'll get in through your system and they just sit there and observe, looking at who you're invoicing. And once they observe that, what they often do is they will pretend to say, hey, I'm Mr. Customer, or our account has changed. Can you like change the payment or whatever into this new account?
Yeah,
And most of them, if they're not closely monitoring it, they didn't even realize this is happening. And
exactly.
and that's the biggest risk is if you are doing your own IT, chances are you're not focusing on IT, you're a law practice. Your focus is serving your clients, probably trying to spend time with your family and trying to deliver the service you best. But then when you see these phishing emails like the one I mentioned earlier, you're like, it's not important. I'm just gonna ignore it. And they're not a large law firm. I mean, they're roughly, under 15 people, but
Yeah. No, it definitely is an issue. And I have, if you're listening to the podcast, you may not know this, but I have another business that I run. That's about a $2.5 million business. It's in a different industry, but it's small, really. We
Hmm.
have under 100 employees. And that message you're describing, we would get that for a while. We were getting those like, hey, it would be disguised as, one of the employees have their name,
Hmm.
have the right email address, or so we thought, and they would email us and say, hey, I need to change my direct deposit
Yeah.
to this routing number and this account number. Can you do that? And we would ask the person, and they would say, no, I didn't send that email.
Hmm.
And we definitely fly under the radar. And I got news for you. Law firms do not fly under the radar. Even if you're a solo, you've got a website, there's usually going to be some information about you on the California State Bar website or your local state bar website.
Yeah.
You do not fly under the radar. Very easy to spot. The only difference is small law firms don't have the tools or the training to really protect well against these kind of attacks. So I'll share with you what I mean by that. One of my largest clients is a law firm, about 50 attorneys, and they're awesome, and they have dedicated IT, and they have a formal um, security training that they do with their employees on an ongoing basis.
Hmm.
They can afford to do that because they have the size. Small law firm cannot. And the issue and why law firms are so attractive to bad actors is a lot of extremely private data that's extremely valuable, and they know that lawyers have money.
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, they think they do.
Yes.
And so it's easy pickings. It really is. And so, Matthew, how do you help these small law firms? Because there's application security, there's computer security,
Hmm.
internet security. I'm sure I'm leaving stuff out. And then the most important part is actually training the people in the firm, whether it's two people or 20.
Yeah.
So, they're less vulnerable to this stuff.
Yeah. So whenever we work with a law firm, we often do what I call a baseline security assessment, just understanding where did they store the information, who has access to the information, when, a lot of times, like, do they have any policies when they make payment? Because oftentimes, if like you mentioned, if somebody has a change in payment or a direct deposit, who's responsible for double checking that information? And if they don't have any written policy, it's important to establish that because you could lose $40,000 or whatever, and you wouldn't know it because you didn't think twice, and the person wouldn't tell you, and because hey, I thought that was you. You asked me to do this. So what we do is once we establish a baseline security, we look at helping them look at their security gaps. One of the biggest challenge with the smaller law firms or businesses is I call they DIY their own IT solution. So when they're starting out, they would pick different technology and try to like, for example, they would pick Gmail as their email system, and then they go to Microsoft 365 because they need to use Word, Excel, and then they would use the storage on maybe another, platform, and they say, "Can you make it all work?" I go, why is all of this places everywhere? It's harder to secure that when you have silos of information in different places. That's the other thing we try to do is let's consolidate and pick one or two platform that will do everything you need versus trying to like uh, pick one here, pick one there, and then try to say, okay, can you just make it work? And once we do that, we provide ongoing support and training. The employee, one of the first thing we often find is when we do the risk assessment, we see people saving password everywhere, or they use the same password.
Same password. Yeah,
But oftentimes we see password being saved in the browser.
that's right. A lot of people do that.
and it's convenient, but it also makes it convenient for anybody who wants to get into your account because you go to a website, it automatically fills in the password for you, and now you just logged in. They don't even ask twice.
Right.
So those are some of the things we do is helping them understand why they need to be a bit more, I would say, ahead of the hacker, one step or two ahead of the
Right.
hackers.
Um, and Matthew, this is going to be kind of a challenge, a delicate question for you to answer. So I appreciate you giving your best effort here. But why is it that for these small law firms, good IT support is so hard to find? So many of them are using that like one person who's kind of running around with a bunch of different businesses as part of the chamber, and they're overloaded. They're
Mhm.
delivering not great service. They're not taking great care of their clients. Oftentimes, that's the person they end up working with. Why is it so
Mhm.
hard for them to find someone good?
I think it's so that's a really great question because a lot of times people do business because they trust that that person is going to take care of them. And it's usually somebody they know or was referral from somebody they know. And however, it may not be the best person for their practice if that individual is a solo individual or the fact that they don't specialize in working in the law firm industry. And if somebody was referred to you by somebody in the chambers, they may be great from, I don't know, fixing their home internet, setting up a new printer for them and buying a new laptop to get it set up and working. But the question is, do they know how to secure a law practice? Do they know how to deal with your practice management software? Do they know how to integrate QuickBooks with your practice management software? And oftentimes it's also a matter of just knowing what to ask or knowing that, hey, what is good means to them because the biggest challenge that I see when people make changes is when they're frustrated because they can't get the response because the single individual is too busy running around versus having somebody who has a team that can support you when you have a
Right.
problem.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. They can only be in one place at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the
And
flip side to it, and I think it's maybe more straightforward than what we're trying to make it. The issue is price. I mean, a lot of IT managed services are going to be charging 2,500 to $3,000 a month, and a lot of small law firms, that's simply that's a big hit.
yep.
Um, so for those small firms, how do you suggest they put together an IT support strategy that's not going to break the bank?
Okay. So that's true. I think most people do look at pricing as one of the factor and it makes sense. When we work with smaller law firms, we try to package our offering for businesses under five and then, 10 and up. And part of that is we know like small law firms, maybe the first thing you may not want a as comprehensive as the larger organization. But at a minimum, when you're starting out, I don't know, let's ask this way. Most business before they start a new company, right? They usually go to a lawyer to do the incorporation and all this, and they pay a one-time fee to get all their paperwork, the article on corporation. At least I did when I was starting out
Yeah,
our
yeah.
company. Same thing for an IT. When you're starting your practice, you need to figure out what is it that you're going to do, what application, and do perhaps a one-time investment to get that set up. Now, as you grow a bit more, you can perhaps maybe invest more into your IT. Because if you're not outsourcing that, who's doing IT?
You are.
You are. You're the business owner. And if you are, you know, if you're billing out at $300 to $500 an hour, is your time worth doing IT versus trying to have somebody else doing it for you? That's probably I can't answer that, but most people would find that, hey, you're probably making more money by billing or having more time to grow your practice and marketing it, or looking at streamlining your workflow.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is most attorneys will get better quality service for less if they work with an IT professional, assuming they can, do what you suggest, which is we're going to spend a little bit of money up front to get everything set up, and then a lower monthly fee that's
Mhm.
going to be sized for our firm. And sounds like they just need to do some research to find an IT firm that's going to be a good fit. Tell me a little bit about eSudo and your ideal client.
Yeah. So Isudo, we've been in the Bay Area for over 24 years. And so we've been working with a lot of small businesses, and our emphasis has always been to just helping them to get the most out of technology while keeping them safe as possible. We can't guarantee that you will never be hacked, but we can make sure that you're not as attractive to the hacker. Okay. And typically we work with small businesses, anywhere from probably under 30 employees. Now we worked with small firms like, for example, we're talking to a collections attorney, and he only has 3 people. But the reason why he talked to us, he goes, my customer is asking me what security measure do I have in place? Otherwise, if I can't answer that, I can't get the contract.
Ah, okay.
See, that's the motivation I think a lot of the firm have is they are being mandated by their customer to say, okay, how are you protecting my data?
Yeah, it's a question they should ask because, at least once or twice a year, I hear about a law firm owner I know, not the same person, but this is different people,
Mhm.
and they're sending out an apology email saying, "I'm so sorry, our firm was hacked, and you got this email that you shouldn't have received," and their reputation is done. I
Yeah,
mean, if you're a lawyer and if your firm gets hacked, it is a huge breach of trust with clients and with colleagues, and it's hard to rebuild that. So
correct. And
I'm
and
glad
that's
you're able to
that's the
provide
key
that.
thing. I, I
Yeah.
think I think it's also looking at it, the right technology can help you sleep better at night for your firm. That to me is probably one of the key things. It's just knowing that somebody is watching out for you, making sure your data is being backed up.
Matthew, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, esudo.com. They can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So I post regularly on LinkedIn, just trying to educate them on stuff. But my LinkedIn profile is just Matthew Matthew Kaing, Kaing. And if you go to esudo, just esudo.com.
Awesome. And as we're wrapping up, is there significance to the name eSudo?
Yeah, so esudo, sudo is this Linux or as a Mac command that stands for super user do. That's an actual command line, the sudo.
Super user do?
That's what that sudo stand for. And
Oh,
E was part of remote. And so we coined those two words, remote super user do, so we can do this remotely.
oh, love that.
Yeah.
Well, I learned
So
something new today.
so that's something that we focus on is most of the time everybody right now is working remotely. So we try to provide some remote support as fast as possible.
Love that. Matthew, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, Alay.
That is Matthew Kaing with eSudo Technologies.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Lawyer Business Advantage podcast. One thing that would really help both us and other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you tune in to listen. And I want to hear from you, so connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you think of this episode. And if you are a solo or an owner of a small law firm, and you're looking to earn more money, attract better clients, or reduce your stress, we would love to talk with you to see how we can help. Request your free law firm assessment by visiting lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. Again, that URL is lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. We look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you for listening. My name is Alay Yajnik. Until next time, remember, You can seize freedom. You can embrace happiness. You can build your perfect practice.